GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, welcome along. The Mark Steyn Show, live on your telly and on your wireless simultaneously and without breaking a sweat. Tonight, the Hunger Games, coming soon to a supermarket near you. Also, are you ready for the Google Institute of Virology? And stand well back, is Prince William turning into his brother? Oh no, I didn't see that plot twister coming. Plus, the one thing we can never get enough of, your questions and comments. Send them along to gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. All that after Polly Middlehurst with the latest news.
Mark, thank you. The top stories tonight. The Queen and other senior members of the royal family have been paying tribute to the late Prince Philip at a memorial service in London. Her Majesty was accompanied by her son, Prince Andrew, who walked with her through Westminster Abbey. The service of thanksgiving featured elements the Duke of Edinburgh had planned himself for his funeral, but which hadn't been allowed due to coronavirus restrictions. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says he's not convinced about Russia's claims of pursuing peace. He says the United States is focused instead on Russia's actions, not its words. That comes as Russia said it would drastically cut its military activity in Kiev and Chernihiv in Ukraine to create the conditions needed for further talks. Negotiations in Turkey between Russian and Ukrainian officials had sparked hopes of progress towards ending the war. The Israeli ambulance service says at least 5 people have been killed in a shooting on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. Reports say the gunman has also been killed after opening fire first towards apartment balconies, then at people on a main street in the suburb of Bnei Brak. It's the latest in a string of attacks, raising security concerns in Israel. Here, Downing Street has rejected P&O Ferries' claim that sacking 800 staff was necessary in order to protect the company. In a letter to the Transport Secretary, the Chief Executive said complying with the government's request to rehire the fired workers would cause the company's collapse. He told MSPs the minimum wage would be paid to workers if the law was changed.
The route that runs between Scotland and Northern Ireland as a domestic route, we are required to pay national minimum wage, and we do pay national minimum wage, and we will continue to pay national minimum wage. And if that were extended elsewhere, we will completely comply with it. And this has not been about rates of pay. This has been about a fundamentally different model.
Peter Hebblethwaite. Downing Street has been insisting today that the Prime Minister didn't mislead Parliament when he told MPs no lockdown rules had been breached, despite a police investigation finding the law was broken. 20 fixed penalties are set to be issued for parties which were held during lockdown at Downing Street. The Metropolitan Police saying they'll be referred to the Acro Criminal Office, which will be responsible for handing out the fines. A dozen events were investigated, and the Prime Minister is thought to have attended as many as 6 of those. Scotland Yard says there could be more referrals in future too. And that comes on the anniversary of the first heart painted on the National COVID Memorial Wall in London. Each painted heart marking a life lost to coronavirus. The COVID Bereaved Families for Justice group says it's clear the British public made sacrifices to protect people, whilst those at Downing Street broke the rules regularly and blatantly. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Mark Steyn.
Polly, Cakegate fines. Is Joe Biden calling for regime change yet? Be that as it may, you don't have to tune in to Radio 2 these days for sounds of the 70s, because sounds of the 70s are all around us. Inflation, cost of living, the price of petrol, all the old favourites. It's 2022, but the entire political moment is wearing cheesecloth shirts and flared trousers. In America, Joe Biden has been blaming the cost of filling your tank on Vladimir Putin. It's Putin's fault, he says. He's been working this line assiduously. He's been flogging with a surprising amount of energy, considering he's the dead horse. And the line is going absolutely nowhere. In an NBC News poll, only 6% of Americans blame Putin and the war for inflation. So that deflection was a big flopperoo. So you can't afford to fill up your car. What's next? Well, how about you can't afford to eat? Food shortages are coming. Trey Malone is an agricultural economist at Michigan State University, and we're delighted to see him. What's really the reason for this? I know Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world, and right now they can't export anything, but what else is underlying this food shortage situation?
What isn't underlying this food shortage situation? I think in the current environment, we've seen so many unique problems at the same time that you could write 10 books to try to describe what's going on in the U.S. food system right now. Globally, we're looking at fertilizer price increases. We're looking at really incredible climate relevant events. And we're also looking at high stressed shortage labor areas in our supply chains, which is been very dramatic in terms of the food prices that we've seen here in the United States and globally.
You know, when people talk about food prices, one thing they do is cause political instability. The whole Arab Spring from whatever it was 10, 12 years ago arose in part because of the Lehman Brothers thing. The global economy turned down, the price of bread went up, and the price of bread went up so high that Egyptians decided to overthrow Mubarak. But we don't often think of it as seriously destabilizing long-settled Western societies. Do you think people in North America and Europe and Australia, do you think citizens of advanced societies are going to be having to rethink what they eat in the months ahead?
I don't think we need to compare where we're at in terms of the Arab Spring relative to the United States' current situation or Europe's current situation. That said, there are some very important developments that I would say across the developing country that are something to keep in mind of. That said, people have been looking inflation in the face for quite some time here in the United States and abroad, with food prices increasing and obviously the empty shelves that we've seen in many grocery stores. So that's been something we've been dealing with for 2 years now. It's just that it's going to continue, and I don't really see much light at the end of the tunnel for some time.
Have we overcomplicated the supply chain? I mean, a country like Yemen, for example, imports about 90% of its food, and we think, oh well, that's Yemen. They're not exactly the most sophisticated society on earth or whatever. But would it be true to say that in Western societies we have made the food supply more vulnerable than we would have if, we were talking 70, 80 years ago, something like that?
I think that the technology alone changes the game in terms of what the food supply system looks like now versus 70, 80 years ago. Honestly, the incredible gains that we've developed through supply chain growth has been really impressive. Here in the United States, for example, we used to be large producers of things like tart cherries, blueberries, etc. But as we've started to move some of that offshore, we've seen lower prices for consumers, and we've seen increased availability on the shelves. I like to talk about my dad. As a child, he would always give us apples for Christmas because in rural Kansas, it was a big deal to have an apple in the middle of winter. But today, it's really not that big of a deal to get an apple any time of year. And that's all globalization, and that's very incredible.
Yeah, that is certainly true. I would bet you that today's kids don't even think of something like apples as being a seasonal thing, because as far as they're concerned, the apple just magically arrives on the supermarket shelves. Well, we'll take a look and see how this goes. Thank you, Trey. Glad you could join us. It's very interesting to me. When I was in Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, almost I soon got to grasp that the oligarchs in Ukraine, unless you're talking about Hunter Biden or whoever it is, the oligarchs in Ukraine are all the people who are in the agricultural sector, as I said, except for the various American politicians messing around over there. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk or via Twitter at gbnews. Oh, don't worry, you're probably saying the experts can handle this. Well, for the last 2 years, we've lived under rule by experts, and the net result is the world is kaput. They got the knighthoods, while you got your business clobbered, your kids got depressed and backwards, and your auntie got stage 4 cancer. But if you were minded to raise a skeptical eyebrow at any of those experts, you got cancelled on social media for spreading misinformation. This very authoritarian axis between big tech, big pharma, and big government would be disturbing merely if they were ideological soulmates. But it turns out the ties go much deeper. According to Politico, a foundation controlled by the former chairman of Google and its parent company has its sticky fingers deep into Joe Biden's science office. Eric Schmidt, the Google honcho, apparently had unprecedented access and power in shaping the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, so much so that Mr. Schmidt, through an entity called Schmidt Futures, that's the future you could well end up living in. Mr. Schmidt indirectly paid the salaries of 2 of Joe Biden's science office bureaucrats, including the current chief of staff. They're government employees, supposedly, civil servants, and yet they're paid by the ex-Google guy. And this is the same Google, by the way, responsible for funding EcoHealth Alliance, the government-backed group headed by an Englishman, Peter Daszak, which openly collaborated with the Wuhan Institute of Virology on gain-of-function killer bat coronavirus research. But it must just be a huge coincidence that big tech shut down anyone who mentioned that Wuhan lab leak theory. nothing to do when your YouTube video disappears with the fact that YouTube's parent company, Google, is in bed with the EcoHealth Alliance. Natalie Winters is the lead investigative reporter at the National Pulse. She's the one who uncovered much of this, and we're glad to have Natalie back on the show. Natalie, I don't quite understand why the global superpower is having a former Google chairman fund its government science office, any more than I quite understand why a guy like Bill Gates gets to be a big donor to the WHO and determine WHO policy. What's going on here?
Well, the modus operandi of the Biden regime is conflict of interest. You see it in Hunter Biden, you see it in basically every aspect of their administration, all the way up to the CIA, to the FBI, down to some of Joe Biden's closest advisors. And of course, a lot of this occurs at the hands of big tech. I'll throw in another conflict of interest just for fun. The leader, the chief technology officer for Joe Biden, is actually a former employee of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, this very same group that plowed hundreds of millions of dollars into the 2020 election to really increase turnout for Joe Biden. So it really seems to be the playbook of the Biden regime to be hiring these people that come from the realm of big tech, that love to censor stories that are critical, frankly, of the Chinese Communist Party, but really coming from outlets like yours, like the National Pulse. So it's really, really interesting. And I think it even represents a more dangerous trend that we've really seen exacerbated under Joe Biden, which is this fusion between ostensibly private companies, right, these social media companies, and the government, which is when you get these kind of controlled, these collaborative efforts to silence voices that don't go along with the mainstream narrative. And I think there's no better example of that than the origins of COVID-19.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are still people who say you can't talk about the lab leak theory. It's still listed as the original conspiracy theory on Wikipedia. And yet the fact of the matter is that the overwhelming evidence supports the idea that this thing came from a lab. And yet now we discover, if you recall, in the old days with Obama and those kind of guys, they used to talk about the revolving door between the American government and Goldman Sachs, and people used to make jokes about that. But in a certain sense, it seems more benign to me than a revolving door between big tech and big pharma and big government.
Well, you're very correct. And it's not just even at the federal level, it's all the way down to state and local levels. We've seen these big tech companies, both in-kind contributions, giving tens of millions, if not in some cases $500 million to local election offices to help administer the vote, to help turn out the vote. But even too, you see it, I think, in another way of sort of campaign contributions in a sense, in terms of who these platforms choose to censor, who these platforms choose to allow to buy ads or not purchase ads. And it's always really interesting because it always seems to be that people who, frankly, are just sharing the truth, people who are sharing the actual, I would say, complicated, unobscured version of the origins of COVID-19, much like the National Pulse, actually citing documents from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, while these same social media platforms leverage fact checkers, who in turn, these fact checkers, the sources that they use, 9 times out of 10, they actually quote researchers from the Wuhan Institute of Virology itself, but I'm sure there's no conflict of interest there. But they use these voices to quash any discussion of the lab leak. And it's certainly curious. You mentioned how Google was funding EcoHealth Alliance. One of the studies that they funded back in 2018 actually talked about wet markets and how bat viruses, particularly SARS, could spill over from these wet markets, essentially laying the groundwork for the mainstream media and Joe Biden regime approved theory of the so-called, wet market spillover, which is really, really curious. And I think it really tells you that Google was not forthright with these conflicts of interest, yet they were very trigger happy to censor anyone who just wanted an open discussion about the origins of COVID.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's almost like a textbook. I mean, Mussolini, for example, would be quite familiar with this, the alliance between government and leading corporations. But he was a piker because in those days he was sitting in Rome and he had an alliance between himself and a few Italian corporations. Now we have an alliance between governments and a handful of billionaires who essentially are the gatekeepers to the entire planet's knowledge. I mean, that is getting in dangerously into 1984 territory, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the newest legion that they've kind of created, these kind of digital warriors to help them enforce their diktats and frankly, their propaganda, are these fact checkers, are these kind of nefarious, nebulous third-party organizations that claim to be bipartisan, claim to be independent and neutral. Those are words they love to throw around. But when you really dig into who these groups are, where their investments lie, it always has to do with far-left organizations, groups that have ties to individuals like Bill Gates, like George Soros, just individuals who look at the world a different way and aren't scared to execute platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter, to help shape and mold the world that you see, the realities that you see on these social media platforms in front of you, to adhere to their globalist worldview. And it's really crazy. We hear a lot of discussion about, Section 230 and wanting to end these platforms or privileges that these platforms get. But it's a broader ecosystem. It's not just about defending an individual's right to free speech. It's about getting rid of these fact-checking and these third-party organizations that for no reason, no credibility, no credence of their own, have a right to silence discussion. And 9 times out of 10, when 6 months pass, they're usually wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely. I feel about fact-checkers the way Will Smith feels about Chris Rock, frankly, because I think that's complete fody baloney. I'm an officially credentialed fact checker. I've got a PhD in fact checking from George Soros University. This is complete nonsense, and it's going to destroy, and it eats away at the very heart of any kind of honest, expressive, vigorous debate. Thank you very much, Natalie. We're always glad to see you. You're one of the best out there at doing some real fact-checking on stuff that all these George Soros fact-checkers don't seem to be the least bit interested in. You can read Natalie at the National Pulse, and you should. Still to come, we've got your comments and questions on the passing scene, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Plus, we have the historian, Jeremy Black, and the man who thinks Prince William is turning into Prince Harry. Oh my word, what you think? Oh, that's great. We got the dud prince and packed him off to Malibu. And then the good prince. Good prince, bad prince. It's like some terrible police routine. That's all coming up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's get to your comments. Andy says in northern Germany, it's almost impossible to get cooking oil and flour. Yeah, we'll get used to it, Andy, because they're two of the things that are in short supply worldwide and are going to be in shorter supply. That's in a small town near Hanover, says Andy. The shelves are starting to empty of many other items. I have no idea if it's temporary. Well, no, it's not there. That's worldwide. That's a basic thing, cooking oil. It's so called because it's oil you use for cooking. So it kind of makes cooking more difficult if you don't have it. Albert says, regularly out of some veg, spices, other stuff just gone, all prices through the roof. We may make this a regular feature. Actually, if you've got a particular product you're missing from your supermarket shelves, it can be a whatever you want, a chocolate egg. It can be a Savoy, as I mentioned the other day. Whatever it is, if you can't find it, could be a pork pie. Whatever it is, let me know, because we're going to have to start tracking this stuff. Jill says, definitely my regular supermarket is constantly out of certain items. To be fair, not the end of the world, but significant increase in prices. Jill, it is the end of the world. It's just like all good movies, dystopian thrillers, it's just starting a little bit low key. But it is the end of the world. As we were talking about earlier, in some countries this is going to cause serious political instability, and in others it's going to make your life pretty miserable. But that's how it is on the food scene. Were you watching GB News earlier today? You should have been. Here's Gloria talking to Tory backbencher Mike Penning.
In May 2021, you tabled an early day motion stating, as the UK has left the European Union, the UK should now leave the Eurovision Song Contest. Do you stand by that?
Absolutely, because the Eurovision Song Contest is the most political thing that would touch most people's lives. I mean, we all sit and watch it. We all know we're going to come last. You all know that Greece is going to vote for Cyprus and the whole of the Eastern Bloc until what's going on at the, obviously recently. But at the end of the day, I don't think that many of the British public know that we pay for the Eurovision Song Contest. So
how? The taxpayer?
The taxpayer pays for it, and that's the only reason that we're always in the final.
That's true. But I always thought, and this is the thing I quite liked about it, the Eurovision Song Contest was the prototypical embodiment of European Union, at least for its first 30 years. You take the glorious musical cultures that gave us Mozart, Bach, Vivaldi, Grieg, Ravel, you bring them all together, and what do you get? La la la, boom bang a bang, ding ding a dong, a bunny bee, diggy loo, diggy lay. That's European Union right there. The whole is a lot less than the sum of the parts. That was the first third of a century or so, and then they held it in Yugoslavia with the always charming hostess Helga Vlahovic, who observed that her country was the perfect Euro metaphor. Yugoslavia is very much like an orchestra, she cooed. The string section and the woodwind section all sit together. That was 1990, and barely were the words out of her mouth before the woodwinds were torching the string section's dressing rooms, and the hills were alive only with the ancient siren songs of ethnic cleansing and genital severing. Lurching into its final movement, despite Helga's fine words, Yugoslavia was no longer the orchestra, only the pits. In an almost too poignant career move, Miss Vlahovic was moved from Yugoslav music programming to Croatian TV's head of war information. And now we have Ukraine. Here is the only Ukrainian song ever to win Eurovision. Take it away, Jamala.
Strangers are coming. They come to your house. They kill you all and say we're not guilty.
Strangers are coming. They kill you all. Strangers are coming, they come to your house, they kill you all and say we're not guilty. That's pretty much on the nose for what's happening in Jamala's country right now. So as goes Eurovision, so goes Ukraine 5 years later. Maybe we should keep Eurovision just as a musical preview of what's likely to happen next in Europe. If you agree with Sir Mike Penning, or if you're happy on taxpayer subsidy of Diggy Loo, Diggy Lay, let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Speaking of history, we have with us almost as incisive and forensic an observer of history's great sweep as Jamala herself. Jeremy Black is an historian who's written more than 100 books, including recently A Short History of War. I wonder, though, if what's going on at the moment is not more of a short war on history, Jeremy, because since George Floyd and all that statue toppling, there seem to be tens of millions of people all over the Western world for whom the very idea of the past is now suspect. So there's no kind of great reverence for the 7/8 of the iceberg below the surface, but a kind of contempt for it. Does that worry you?
Yes, it does worry me. I think, as you've shown, there are many problems in the world at the present moment. And at the moment, when we're thinking about the world economy, when we're thinking about conflict, Ukraine, other places, why on earth anybody should be concerned about knocking down statues seems to me just self-indulgence of the most foolish type, and also very divisive. You made the point about how in Yugoslavia ancestral hatreds helped to stir up people slaughtering their neighbours and other communities. It's not brilliant in Britain or in any other country to actually try and undermine people's sense of living in a community. And one of the ways we live in a community is we accept that other people have points of view that are different to ours. What we should not be then trying to do is to destroy their heritage or what they might see as their heritage.
That's actually a very good point. I spent some time in Mostar, where Christians and Muslims had always been relatively relaxed and had gotten on with each other, and then they blew up the bridge and they were separated communities, and you can't, it's very difficult to find a way back from that. You know, when all this thing started, Emmanuel Macron, who's not a guy I have a lot of time for particularly, but he said, we're not taking down a single statue, we're not changing a single street name, these are all part of our history, and that's that, forget about it. And I wonder sometimes why it is that political leaders attempt to negotiate with these people about which parts of the past are acceptable and which are not.
Well, you're right, Mark. And I mean, a point about Macron, I'm not particularly fond of Macron, but one of the things about France is that they do have a sense of nationhood. And for example, they're not in favour of sectarian education. Now, I personally think in Britain, it's a mistake to have sectarian education. I think we saw in Northern Ireland, where Catholics and Protestants were on the whole educated separately, that was not a good idea. And, you know, they were allowed to develop their very hostile historical accounts. It would not be brilliant to be doing the same in mainland Britain or United States or other countries. There is something to be said, if you live in a community, that you should abide by a set of rules. And those rules are not just the law, which obviously we're supposed to abide by, but also the assumption that people you don't like or who upset you, basically get a grip on yourself and accept that there are people out there who will have different views to you, and, you know, you have to be prepared to accept that. It's very irritating and worrying that we have a society now where increasingly people are saying that they won't talk to people of different political beliefs, you know, the kind of I won't kiss a Tory kind of thing. Well, when you look at some of the MPs, I'm not surprised people might think that. But on the other hand, the actual principle is not a brilliant one. And I think that it is very destructive for society if we go down that path. And what's ironic is that the left has traditionally preached the brotherhood of man, but what is very clear is it's only a brotherhood or sisterhood or in-betweenhood, whatever you want to call it, which is that of very restricted beliefs.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. I mean, I wonder if it's not more than just belief, though, that there's actually a contempt for reality. When the George Floyd thing started and people began tearing down statues of Confederate generals in America, I said my casual observation of the Commonwealth was that those statues, those countries that had kept their statues of Queen Victoria in the centre of the town square had generally prospered, whereas those that had taken them down and stuck them in a landfill somewhere had generally not. And I was just thinking today with the service for the Duke of Edinburgh, you had some interesting insights into monarchy at the time His Royal Highness died last year. And your one point was that basically, you know, almost every country has a monarch. Sometimes they're just elected monarchs who get called presidents, but essentially there's a monarchical aspect to most systems of government. There are very few true republics in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think one of the points that we would argue about our monarchy, and again, you know, you were talking about President Macron, that the French would argue about their presidency, is that there is a continuity represented in which the community has a sense of value in part through continuity. So if you trash the history of a culture, what you're actually trying to do is to weaken that sense of community or to destroy it. I mean, in practical terms, President Putin is trying to destroy a sense of community in Ukraine separate to the community he intends to impose of Russianness. So in the case of Britain, I'm afraid to say, people who go around trashing sort of empire, trashing the past, well, several points to make about that. One, I don't know whether anybody's ever thought about this, but we could easily have a situation in which we are all made redundant in the future from a future which thinks that we are absolutely awful because we allowed animals to be killed to eat. I eat meat, I make perfectly clear. And in other words, values have to be ones in which you have a sense of trust with the past. You want to be able to feel that you understand why people in the past did what they did, just as you would like to feel that future generations would understand why you did what you thought was important and valuable. And we've got to be very careful about trashing the past. We can say we wouldn't do it now, and I think it's very clear we wouldn't now do a lot of things we've done in the past. But that's not the same as saying that our links with the past are evil, and that is not a helpful proposition because it carries with it the idea of inherited sin, inherited guilt, and that is not a healthy attitude in any society.
But when you say something, oh, I wouldn't do that now, I mean, there's not a lot of things in the past that one would do. I wouldn't wear, you know, doublet and hose. But the reason I say that is because it accepts that the past is different and that what matters is, as you were saying, the thread of continuity. Without which, I think, if you just live in a sort of hyper-present tense, as many people seem to do today, then you're kind of game for almost any kind of idiotic thesis that anybody comes up with to explain why this is so and that is so. If you don't have millennia of human history behind you, you're basically a chump for whatever huckster comes along, aren't you?
Well, you are, Mark, and there's another particular point, which is that of obeying the law. If you're going to say that one moment something is legal and the next moment it is illegal, and then the moment after it is legal, you are going to sap people's sense not just of value but of actually being part of a community. And we are, it's always been a tussle for conservatives, and I'm a conservative. It's always been a tussle for how we link our belief in individual freedom with our belief in the community, in a sense that we want to have a sense of nationhood, a sense of identity. But we actually, I think, as conservatives, are willing to be open about that there is a tension there. What the mistake is people pretending that there is no tension, that you can either trash individual freedom or you can trash collective sort of nationhood and somehow create a perfect future. Perfection is a mistake. You cannot have perfection. So what you should do is try and work with the imperfections, which is us all, not you, of course, Mark, but the rest of us, and try and work with that and move forward accordingly.
Yeah, I wonder if it's not also a kind of narcissism, the idea that you're not interested in some 19th century composer because of whatever his views on race or transgender bathrooms or whatever it is happens to be. It's the idea that every man or woman from the past has to be measured against your own indestructible moral superiority. I find that sort of distasteful, apart from anything else.
Well, it is distasteful, it's silly, and of course also ultimately it becomes self-destructive, because what happens is people, as it were, identify with a group, and then they discover that somebody in their group, it's happened to the radical feminists, of course, who have fallen out over the transgender people. They discover that somebody isn't quite as pure, whatever purity means, in this context. Now, that kind of pursuit of purity ends up being really destructive. I mean, the obvious regime that we saw doing that was Pol Pot in Cambodia, where they killed, about a third of the population because they didn't measure up to the standards of the new regime. And I have to say, you made reference, obviously, in your discussion about slavery. Well, slavery in the past is something that was wrong, and we can see it's wrong. But the fact of the matter is, if you wish to get concerned about slavery today, which I do, you have slave societies. North Korea is a slave society. What President Putin is trying to impose on Ukraine is a form of slavery. It seems bizarre to be destroying the statues of Confederate generals from the 1860s and actually sitting around and, taking off products from Walmart, which have been made by, in effect, indentured labour in Chinese work camps. And to me, this is just ridiculous.
I'm glad you say that, because the idea is that cheap Chinese goods come without any moral price at all. And in fact, that is not the case. There is some component of slave labour always somewhere in the process. Even if it's, your cheap T-shirt factory might be paying reasonable wages, but the people who supply the sandwiches you eat at lunchtime on your shift there are working for some slave labour corp. And there's absolutely no interest in today's slavery. Thank you very much for...
People prefer to beat up on the past. As I said, they prefer to sort of throw down a statue of Robert E. Lee, who died just over 150 years ago. They prefer to do that than actually address the difficult issues. Same in Britain. Within 5 miles of County Hall in the centre of London, you will have people that have been trafficked as slave labourers, often for prostitution, but sometimes for work. And, it's easier for the Mayor of London to beat up about renaming Tulse Hill or sections of London rather than to actually address the issue of what he's going to do about slave labour in England at the moment. The only politician who really tried to do anything about it was Theresa May, first as Home Secretary and then as Prime Minister. But the Labour people have spent ages declaiming about the past and have done very little about the existence of slavery in modern Britain.
Yeah, because it's a lot easier, frankly, and Sadiq Khan will eventually be as unpopular as that Tulse guy when they look at his record on 21st century sex trafficking and all the rest of it. Thank you very much for that, Jeremy. It's a great perspective, and I hope history survives in this weird hyper present tense madness that we're living in. Coming up, you can ask me anything in Stump the Steyn, GB Views at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GBNews. And as we remember the Queen's long-lived consort, what lies ahead for the Royal House? Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Today was the memorial service for the Duke of Edinburgh. He was born in 1921 as the crowned heads of Europe were tumbling. The Romanovs, the Habsburgs, the Hohenzollerns, and eventually his own family in Greece. He did not wish the Windsors to join those lost empires in the dustbin of history, and he steered a very canny course for the palace through turbulent times. When his wife ascended the throne, Truman was in the White House, Stalin was in the Kremlin, and Mao had just taken over in China. That's a lost world. Her Majesty is a survivor, but for the first time she seems tired, exhausted by it all. No shame in that. She's been doing the job 365 days a year for 7 decades. But her successors are different, and I don't just mean her climate-obsessed son. Her grandson said the other day to his putative Bahamian subjects that he wasn't sure he wanted to be head of the Commonwealth because he wasn't comfortable telling people what to do, which is in itself a curious view of the role of head of the Commonwealth. Alexander Lahmann wrote about this at the Spectator under the terrifying headline, "Prince William is turning into his brother." He joins me now. Alexander, I should ask you about that because, in a sense, with the benefit of his absence this last couple of years, One of the virtues of Prince Harry was that he made Prince William look good by comparison. And since he's in Malibu, he no longer fulfills that function. But it was actually quite a useful one because we sort of saw Prince William a little more clearly in the Caribbean these last few days.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, isn't it? Because what we've seen with Prince Harry over the last few years is that he's behaved so badly and so disgracefully publicly that essentially William has come across as the sympathetic, patient, responsible elder brother. But what we've now seen over the last few days is actually, I think it's a combination of two things. First of all, we see the press have been quite keen to find a new angle because the stories have for so long been Prince Harry being irresponsible, William being responsible, and of course all the Prince Andrew stuff. But actually it's quite interesting to look at Prince William and I think it's fair to say fairly disastrous tour of the Caribbean. But I think the reason why it's been so disastrous is because it was so poorly planned. But if it had been done 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when it was a more natural home for things like that, I think it would have been absolutely fine because I don't think that people would have been going away and saying, oh, it's a white saviour complex, oh, it's this sense of, William trying to show off. But he was trying to have his cake and eat it, I think. But on the one hand, he was trying to present himself as this modern figure, acknowledging that perhaps the time has come that he's no longer going to be head of the Commonwealth, he's no longer going to be this figure who's going to be essentially telling his subjects what to do. Then on the other hand, there's still all the pageantry, there's all that rather regrettable stuff from standing on top of a Range Rover, and you're just thinking to yourself, this isn't a very good idea because it's making you look out of touch. It's making you look like you haven't really got what's going on, not just in the wider reaches of the world, but in your own family. And at the time, people are bending over backwards to try and come across as more accessible and more, universally understanding of what's going on in the world. I think there's a lot of missed opportunities and a lot of rather poorly judged photo opportunities as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if he's not there as the second in line to the throne and embodying all the majesty of the royal house, then he's just some rather obscure white privileged celebrity giving the same old boring opinions on climate change and everything else. The only reason people are interested in him is because he's second in line to the throne, which seems to be the one thing. I mean, I don't even get it. If he doesn't want to be head of the Commonwealth, why doesn't he just take himself out of the line of succession and go to Tahiti and paint for the rest of his life?
Well, I'm sure he'd make an excellent second go-gam, but on the other hand, if you look at William, he's bullshit in the same way that Harry's bullshit. And you can see with both of them that there is this anger which is expressed specifically towards the media, who both of them believe killed their mother, but also to the wider world. There's a sense of, why can't you just shut up, respect us, and let us get on with our jobs? And of course, in Harry's case, he was pushed into his quasi-abdication by his charming wife. But in William's case, after for so long being given this opportunity, to essentially have a far more public respect than his father, far more public respect than his uncle, in fact, far more public respect than anybody in his family apart from his grandmother, you can see that the bolshiness and the tetchiness and the willingness to snap at people is finally coming out. And you think to yourself, but it's coming out a bit early, isn't it? Because if you waited another 10 years or so, by the time that your father has essentially shown us what sort of king he's going to be, then there'd be the chance to actually say, well, this is how I'm going to define myself differently. Because one of the things that we're all saying at the moment is, as you said a moment ago, today at the service for Prince Philip, the Queen looked tired. It was the first public appearance that I think the country will have seen that we've actually all thought, we're looking at a 96-year-old woman who's beginning to look her age, because for a very long time she was essentially defying it. But we can see now that the old iron fist and the velvet glove's not so much a thing anymore, and we see instead that it's somebody who is aging, I think, quite fast. And so we now have to think about the prospect of King Charles. But then that's making us also think about at some point, it sounds ridiculous even to say, King William. And I think what we've seen over the last week, 10 days in the Caribbean is somebody who might be a more controversial figure than we've been expecting, somebody who might be stuck between the urge to modernise and the urge to bring about a sort of, if you will, this sort of non-Commonwealth relationship with these former colonies, but also somebody who clearly wants to be seen as king.
Yeah, I found that head of the Commonwealth comment just bizarre. Just finally, Alexander, and quickly, do you think he's managed to put in the course of a week in Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas? Do you think he's actually managed to put a great big question mark over the future of the monarchy?
I think that the last couple of years have been putting the long-term future of the monarchy in great danger. I mean, it's quite funny because having written a book called The Crown in Crisis, I thought that was a historical book. I didn't realise that might be a comment on what we're about to see now. And certainly what I feel with a combination of William, Charles, Andrew, Harry, all of them together, is that it's as if they sat down one day at Balmoral or Sandringham and just said, right, what can we do to properly damage the reputation of the monarchy? And they divided up as if it was a kind of pie. And you can see that each of them has been doing something which is damaging in a completely different way. But the interesting thing about William is that, as I said, up till very recently, he had this reputation as being more serious and more taking his responsibilities in a more adult way. But in fact, he might be as petulant as the rest of them. Sort of
thank you. Yeah, it is odd. It's sort of changed, I think, certainly in the Caribbean, it's changed a lot of people's views on that. Thank you for that, Alexander. Do check out that Spectator column. I should add, actually, just last year, I watched the Commonwealth Day service for the first time in many years, and Prince William was there with Kate talking to a Bangladeshi fellow from Bangladesh who'd set up a taxi service for basically a rural ambulance service for Bangladesh. And I thought, oh my word, I'd forgotten how nice the Commonwealth is. It's Prince William and his lovely Duchess talking to a nice guy who set up a rural ambulance service for Bangladesh. And it was almost unbearably nice. And what's happened in the last few days in the Caribbean has not been very nice at all. Jeannie, let's do a Stump the Stein before we go. Jeannie asked, what can we do to defeat the blasphemy mob intent on outlawing any criticism of Islam? What can we do for the Batley teacher still in hiding? This is the guy who showed an illustration of Muhammad during his class, and he's been living in hiding ever since. I'm a free speech absolutist. I don't care if your particular religion forbids representations of this guy or that guy. You're bound by that. The rest of us shouldn't be bound by that unless we decide to sign on to the strictures of Islam or whatever. And unfortunately, things like the fate of that Batley teacher make us all submit to the strictures of Islam, which is not right at all in a diverse society. That's going to do it for me. Dan Wooden will titillate your Tuesday for 2 rollicking hours. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello again. This time last week it was all about blue skies and soaring temperatures, but the next few days are going to offer a big contrast. It is turning much colder with ice in places and even some snow. Here's the reason why this cold front is drifting southwards. It wiggles around a little bit, and that could provide a bit of snow, particularly during tomorrow evening. But it introduces the cold air everywhere by Thursday. Back to tonight, and the cold air is moving in across the northeast of Scotland, and with the snow showers here, that could cause a bit of disruption, ice and snow risk, so we do have a yellow warning in place. Rain spreading into parts of northern England and Northern Ireland. Behind that, the colder air, so a frost. It'll be a relatively mild night across the south. Temperatures about average as we start Wednesday here. And a dry, bright day for parts of the southwest. Certainly a brighter day compared to today with some sunshine, but dull and damp to start with for Northern Ireland, Northern England. As this zone of rain drifts south into the Midlands and East Anglia, could be a bit of snow on the hills over northern parts of England. Certainly more snow showers coming into the far north, and the colder air has spread further south. So today in the teens in Belfast, Tomorrow only 7 Celsius. We could again get into the teens in the southwest. Some late showers here, but the biggest cause for concern is this zone of wet weather sinking south tomorrow evening. As the cold air hits that, we could easily see some snow, mostly over hills, but even to low levels, there could well be a covering over parts of the Midlands and southern England as we start Thursday. Quite a bit of uncertainty about that, but stay up to date with the forecast. As I say, you could wake up to a covering of snow across parts of the Midlands, southern England on Thursday morning. Still some wet weather here during the rush hour as well, taking a while before it clears away. A few wintry showers then across the east, a mixture of sleet, hail and some snow. Sunny spells further west during Thursday, but look at the numbers, single figures across the board and feeling a lot colder, particularly with that wind coming in from the North Sea.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll